Ted Stepanoff. So I currently work in New York City for a company called UJ Federation of New York. It's a Jewish nonprofit. We collect money for about 100 other nonprofits, so money funnels through us. I'm in charge of their website. So I have 3 developers and a Linux administrator under me, or systems administrator. I've been doing this job for about 4 years, and I have some experience in hiring people, making bad decisions in hiring people. I have to fire people. We're not going to talk much about that unless people have questions about that, but we mostly talk about how to make good hiring decisions from a manager's perspective, but also hopefully give you guys a perspective of when you're interviewing, what leaves a good impression, why is somebody asking certain questions, or what I've learned over the years works for me. This is not the end-all and be-all of interviewing, but it's advice from someone who's done it before, and hopefully you'll learn something. Besides that, I am also a marathoner. So I'm running New York for the 5th time this year. I ran Chicago last year as well, so I like to travel. I'm actually going to Brussels tomorrow, and then Morocco for 10 days. And then I enjoy good wine. If you get a chance, connect with me on LinkedIn, because I'm trying to get to 500 people, so I get to 500 plus, so it's always good. So I have a quote. All our dreams can come true if you have the courage to pursue them. All I'm doing is saying, if you're in a job, you want a better job, don't be afraid to go ask for it. So to me, one of the things I've been doing is interviewing myself for some jobs recently. And I was reading a book, I was reading a podcast. One of the things they say is, what's the worst that can happen, right? You go to an interview, they say no, or they don't call you back, right? Especially if you have a job already, there should be nothing stopping you from applying for a job or looking for a job. Going for an aspirational job that you think, they say they need all these things in the job description, but I have a couple of them. Why don't I apply? You never know who's going to apply, what pool of candidates there are. As someone that writes a job description, you fluff it up sometimes to say, I need this, I need that. I've gone to HR and said, I don't want to include that you need a college degree. And they're like, well, why not? I said, well, because in my job, I don't care if you have a college degree. Really what I'm looking for is, can they do the job? So, I've had that argument with HR. And so that's advice is, if you find something online or, in a position or someone tells you about something, it's always good to apply for it with that. I always say the best time to look for a job is when you have a job, right? Because, again, if they say no, you still have the job that you have. You're still probably in a good place for that. So step 1, your resume. What is the goal of a resume? This is a interactive part.
Sell you as a candidate.
Does anyone else have a?
Explain your skills and experience. Where your strengths are.
So for me, the goal of a resume is to get the interview, or at least get a phone call, right? To get the phone interview. You're not looking at a resume to list everything you've ever done in your life. You want to keep it pertinent. I recommend highly, when you do a resume, you see a job description, change your resume to match what the job description is. If you've done work at companies that match what that is, don't have a generic resume that you send out to that company. Spend an hour modifying and saying, okay, they're looking for someone that does this, or they're looking for a PHP developer that has experience with Mongo. Well, if you worked on Mongo, make sure that's highlighted in what you've done with Mongo so that they know, oh, not only this person, PHP and everything else, they've actually done what I'm looking for. You don't want to maybe verbatim and word for word do everything, but at least make it for that. I've had people ask, or a new manager came to me recently and said, just became a manager about 2 months ago. He was his first hire. I've been interviewing people. He goes, when you look at resumes, what do you look at? I said, do you look at their GPAs? I said, well, I don't look at GPAs. Unless they're fresh out of college, it's their first job, there's really no need to look at a GPA because, and even if they're fresh out of college, if you think about it, if they have a 4.0 GPA, either they're really smart, they could be book smart, but they can't apply things, or vice versa, they could have been working through college. So they've been busy with other things. They have other skill sets in terms of they had time management and they're self-starters, but maybe they couldn't commit as much to the work that they were doing, but now that they're looking for a job, that's an asset that you can use. Or they had, like I said, they had to work. Somebody could have parents could have paid for school, and so it was easy for them, and so they didn't have to do anything. And you never know who you're going to get until you start that. But I don't look at that. Things you want to leave off your resume are your address. You can put a city, state, but nobody needs to know where you live. Make sure never to include your social security number for obvious reasons. Your Facebook profile, I don't really care. I mean, I'm not looking for you. And like a GPA, things like that. I highly recommend keeping it to 1 page, 2 if you really need it. But consider, again, if you're trying to have the resume get you the job, if you volunteered at 20 different places, that may be something you talk about at the interview. It's not something you might want to put on the resume because, again, that's not really getting you the job. They're looking at the skill set that you have. If you've had 20 different jobs and they're all short, I can tell you that's a red flag from a manager's point of view. It's like, well, especially if you're trying to find someone that you want to stick around for a while, it takes a while to train someone, and you start wondering. If there's one in the midst of a couple, then you're like, okay, something must have happened or they got a better position. But you start thinking, oh, it's either the candidate is hopping around job hopping or they're having issues at the jobs that they are and why are not there. One of the things that I would say that I've thought about, it's like, well, what is a job that may be acceptable? If you're, let's say, in a startup world where you're jumping from startup to startup, that may be a place where it's not as important, and you can list those and not be afraid. A cover letter sometimes can help with explaining why you have that, but it's still going to be a red flag for me personally that you've skipped around a lot. And if there's someone that's more qualified or as qualified, sometimes even a little less qualified, I'm willing to accept that versus someone that's going to leave in 6 months and I've just spent all this time hiring, training, getting them on board, teaching them the system, and now they're gone out the door. So that's what a resume is doing for me. You want legible fonts. You don't want anything fancy, things like that. So does anyone have any questions about a resume in general? Yes.
So I had this argument with my girlfriend's mom. She was currently hiring me, and she works at that type of school. She said that she dropped anywhere where it doesn't have the objective heading, and I've never included that in the resume at all. But you know what I mean?
No, I understand. So you're asking about the objective on a resume. I will say that in the books I've been reading, podcasts, like people I've spoken to, that's a little outdated.
Yeah.
Most managers don't look at that because your objective is to get the job, right? That's why you applied. So what's the point of running an objective on there? So to me, it's again useless. It's not really pertinent to what you're doing for that. Well, like I said, this is my experience, but I've read some books. I've listened to things that. And like I said, I've never looked at it. I might look at it and be like, okay, but if you think about it, what is the resume to get the job? No. So it depends. Unless you have a compelling reason to have 2 pages, I would try and stick with 1 page. Whittle it down to what you've done. The other thing I like when people have resumes that have action items that like, this is what I did, and this is the results for the company. Like, I built this website, and revenue increased this much. Or I redid this section, and users were much happier, and we got a survey that said that, or whatever it was. Or we updated our code to a new code base, and our efficiency was 20 times more efficient in speed-wise, or faster. So things that you can write concrete things that you've done that helped are very good, especially if they relate to the job description on the web. Or the position you're applying for. Well, detailed is, that is a resume. Whether they use the word detail in front of it or not, it's still a resume. So, correct. So you have more and more. So as you go away from jobs, so let's say you have 20 years, 30 years of experience, the job that you had 30 years ago isn't as relevant today as it was, right? So you may just have a line that says, I work for this company and did this. As you get further up, you might have a line that says, here's the main function that I did at that job. And then as you get more, your recent one will have a lot more of, this is what I did, this is how it worked. So it will kind of progress, starting at the top to have more details, and then it'll have less details at the bottom. Because really, we're just saying, OK, you did work there, but we don't really care about that. So that's kind of where it goes. And I will also say that work experience goes a lot further than education, especially the longer you are in the workforce. Once you're 10, 20 years out, nobody cares when you went to school. They look at what your recent job was, were you good at it, and then they go from there. So the phone interview. So sometimes there's an intermediate step before you get the job. So the phone interview, I've had a couple of those. They usually call you'll call someone and say, you might have a question about the resume before you bring them in. So you ask them about, well, you say this on the resume, how does that work? Or, sometimes it's also a clarifying question of salary position. Sometimes people look overqualified and you're going, well, here's the salary range. Or you find that out and say, are you still interested? Because it's useless bringing them in and wasting their time and yours when they're like, actually, I wanted $30,000 more. And they're like, no, it's a waste of my time. So, those things. But, sometimes you talk to a manager and they're, trying to get you in. So then you're going to meet more people. My suggestion on a phone interview, make sure when you set the time aside, you have a quiet place. You make sure your phone is working. You don't want any distractions. And when the person calls or if you're calling, be on time. That's important. If you're not, that's the first impression that you're going to get is, somebody's calling you at 5 o'clock because you said 5 o'clock. And then even if you miss the call and you have to call them back, it's very awkward to say, oh, I'm sorry, I was for whatever reason. So and sometimes it's unavoidable if for whatever reason you try and pick it up and it's not working. But if at all possible, try and avoid that just because it gives a bad impression right off. So then we have the actual interview. So this is the part that I'm going to spend the most time on. So when I first started, people would come in, and I'd say, OK, what do I have to ask them? So it's like, so I was very much about, OK, tell me about yourself, and then asking them a couple questions about their technical skills. But I really had very little insight into who that person was. So over the years, I've learned a couple things. I'm looking to see how they're going to fit into the team, the culture at the company I'm at. Do they have the skills that I need, first of all? Do they have the skills that they claim they say? And so that's where this process has been a bit of a journey for me. So initially, I thought to myself, oh, I work for a nonprofit. Our salary positions, especially for New York, are pretty low because that's the basis of the nonprofit. We're trying to save money. Why don't we, I'll hire some people that I think could potentially get to the place I need. The difficulty with that has been that it doesn't work out that way. There are very few people that you can hire on the expectation that they're going to improve. So my interviewing has changed from just asking questions, and I just had a knowledge test. I have a test that they go online. I have a different one for the PHP people, and a different one for the front end, and it asks them about 20 questions. And I could usually gauge from the interview how that person is going to do on the test. Because certain people, you're in the interview talking about things, and they just don't have any responses, or they're just sitting there going, yeah, I've done that. It's like, well, what did you do? It's like, well, they don't respond with anything. So I'm usually thinking, OK, they're not going to do well on the test. And one of the caveats I've also told people is this test is obviously online. I use a class marker, I think is what it's called. But this test is a basic test. I mean, it really is like basic knowledge. And it should be things that you can do if you have any experience at all. And I've told people, don't use the internet, don't use your phone. And people that didn't know anything in the interview all of a sudden knew these questions. And I'd Google their question. It was verbatim of a web page. I'm going, I'm not even going to look at the rest of your questions because you don't know what you're talking about. I could tell already that you're not honest, you don't know, and I'm going to move on. Now, I used to just have that one test. Now, the problem with that one test is it's not a real-world scenario for me. So I never know, okay, they might have some basic knowledge, but can they apply it? And to me, that's an important part of, that's been a major change for me. So I now have a second test. So usually, they'll come back a second time if I'm really interested. And I'll go and give them a test. And this time, it's set up like our current environment. But it's not really our code base. It's a different code base. It's just an empty code base that says whether it's in Zen Framework, which we use, or in Angular for the front end. And I'll give them an assignment. And I say, whatever it is, the front end may say, I need a form that does these things. When you click the button, it submits it to this fake API. There's going to be an error. I want this to display on the page. And there might be a couple of, I give them a task that I know they can't complete in the amount of time that they're given. I used to give people open-ended and say, okay, work on this. And I realize that people will sit there for 4 hours if you let them. Even though I tell them you could use whatever you want, and I'm like, it shouldn't take that long. I said, if I were to, and I gave it to my front-end guy, and he could do it in like 30 minutes. But he's very experienced. So I'm like, okay, 30 minutes. Let's see how quickly somebody else could do it. And I found that one of the gauges I use is not only how well you did the task, but how far in the list you've gotten. Because I give them an hour and a half, and I say, because also I don't want to be sitting there waiting for them to finish. So I've learned, give them a time limit. And it's interesting to see people who, at this point, they can use any resources they want, because that's how we work, right? You don't sit there going, I wonder how this works. You Google it. Or you go and you read the documentation. And that's where I'm using that skill set of someone to see how they work in a real-world environment. The one thing that I don't do is answer any technical questions. If they have questions about the task, I'm happy to answer it. But I don't ask any technical question or answer any technical questions. So if they ask me how to do something, it's like, well, that's the job. Like, figure it out. If there's a specific setup question or if there's a question about the specific task, I'm happy to help them. So that's been a big change for me from when I started to now is it really gives me a better gauge because somebody could do well on the knowledge questions, but not on the technical side. So, people always say, oh, all these companies ask or give tests or this or that. And I think that you shouldn't be intimidated by the fact that there's a test, right? Just do the best that you can. If there's, actually the employee I hired said that there was this other test, and so we looked it up and we're like, okay, this is an interesting test. He's like, I just looked at it. I was so intimidated. It seemed like I could never do it. I'm like, I don't think they're looking for you to complete it. Because the questions were so outrageous, and there were so many of them in such a short time. I'm like, even if you're the best coder, if you're the best coder in the world, you probably can do this. Everyone else isn't going to finish. But I think their thought process is, well, what is your thought process? How are you writing the code? How are you structuring it? What are you getting? How are you solving the problem? If you have 10 loops and really they said, well, you could do it in one, they can see that and and they can see both your skill set and your thought process. So that's really what that test is. I've also, if I felt like for whatever reason somebody was really strong in the interview but didn't succeed well in the test, I might give it to them and say, okay, send it, have the weekend, send it to me at the weekend. But let me tell you, I expect much more when it comes back. I expect it done. I expect it done in a certain standard because at that point you could do it at home and you can do it that way. So that's really why I've started doing those tests. And I highly encourage if anyone ever interviews and they need to know that, to do a skills test. It really is illuminating from that. So some of the other things that I've learned over the years, when you come and interview, I always ask what people are working on. What is your side project? Or what is your current project at work? I find the people that have side projects and are passionate about them, first off, it shows that you're a self-starter. You go research these things. You can figure out how to make something work, especially if it's not something you're doing at work, but it's a project. You picked up a new language or a new framework, and you're going, oh, this person can go read documentation. They can go implement things. They have ideas, and they're passionate about what they're doing. They pull out their phone, and they can show you how it works. Say, actually, I'm working on this. I want to do that. To me, that shows very much that that's someone I want to hire. They do work on their own. Well, when they're here, they're going to give that and more when they're on the team. So I always look for that. It's a big plus. I think I've hired at least 2 of my developers that I really like have had side projects that I've one of the reasons that they stuck out in my mind was this is what they do on the side. And so that, if you ever want to have something to talk about side projects, talk about things you've learned. I always like to ask people, I'll pick random obscure things on people's resumes and say, okay, they worked in this technology. I may not know much about it, but I'll go look it up and start talking to them about it. Why? I want to see if they can teach me something. Because if they can teach me something, they can teach a coworker. They could teach a designer or somebody in marketing that has a question. These are the things I'm looking for in my teammates and so. One of the other things that we do at our company is we have them interview multiple people. You'd think that that'd be obvious, but they actually start in HR. HR vets them for, are they going to fit in the company? But when they come to me, I want other advice from teammates. I have them sit with my team, and my team will ask them questions, see how they interact, just to make sure that they're going to fit on the team, right? Because if someone's very shy and they're going to be on their own, I'm not saying they're a bad programmer. I'm just saying that they might not be a good fit if you want the team to be cohesive, especially on a small team. We have, like I said, 3 developers, and they're constantly talking to each other. They sit right next to each other. My team often goes to lunch together. They're very cohesive and together. And you want someone to kind of fit into that together. And if they don't, even if they're the best coder, it might not be someone I look at for that reason. So when I have them also interview with my boss and our project manager, it's interesting to get perspective from my boss, who's the CIO of our company. There have been certain hires where he's like, well, I didn't know if he would work out or not, but I was going to let you decide. I was like, well, why didn't you tell me? He's like, well, sometimes you got to learn by making a mistake. So I had an employee that on paper was very good, very enthusiastic. However, the first day he got there, he said, oh, you're putting a new phone system. You shouldn't have went with that system. You should have went with a different one. It's like he doesn't know our budget. He doesn't know what research went into it. He doesn't know what constraints we needed for the phone system. He immediately knew that he knew something better than everyone else. And so he and I started butting heads very quickly in terms of, I would say, do it this way. He'd say, why, and then not want to do it. And so it became very almost combative at times where it was very unproductive as well. So you want to take people's advice. If somebody tells you, well, I'm not sure, think about why they're not sure. Ask them questions, because you may not see it. You may think, oh, this guy is great on paper and be so enthusiastic. When it actually comes to getting there, getting them to do something, it might not work out as well. So does anyone have any questions about the interview? I hope so. Yes? I do not. So what I do is I actually design the test to kind of have like multiple steps. So that way I can kind of see where they get to in those steps. And it gives me a gauge of, especially if someone says, oh, I have a little bit of experience in this language or in this framework. Okay, well, if you have experience, you should be, like, in my mind, they should get to a certain point. Now, the other thing is sometimes I've had candidates come up to me and say, it doesn't seem like this is working or that's working, which I actually like because, again, when you work on a team, if you have an issue, sometimes you can solve it on your own, but the interviewee is in a time crunch. So if it's not working, the fact that you had the ability to come up to the person trying to hire you and say, hey, I think I'm having a problem here. What's going, can you help me out? Or at least answer, is it supposed to do this or not? Shows me that they're willing and kind of understand when to come to me and when not as an employee. That's been a challenge for me with some of my employees as well, is they don't know when to ask me a question and when to figure it out on their own. Or when to come to me with questions about this direction or that direction versus, can you tell me how to do this? It's like, well, that's your job, so. But yes, I specifically made it so that it's very hard to finish in the time allotted, just to see how far they get. Plus, when I say make a form, somebody can make the form very pretty. Somebody can make it very just functional. I don't specify that. I let them, I would assume if I were doing it, I'd just make it very functional first and then pretty it up at the end if I had time. Again, it goes to time management, how far you think you're going to get. But these are things that as a manager, I'm looking at and kind of evaluating all the little things, all the little decisions that you make. Because if you think about it, how many times have I seen you? You know, I read your resume. I may have talked to you on the phone, and now I've had one interview with you. Maybe I brought you back a second time. You know, and now I have to evaluate whether you're going to be a candidate for the company that's going to work there for many years. It's one of those things that you have to make quick decisions and quick judgments. So every kind of little thing that you do in that interview process can have an effect on the manager's perception of you. One of the things in an interview that, like I said before, I think really bothers me is when I try and have a conversation with someone, sometimes we get very off topic, which is fine for me because you should, you know, the tests are going to evaluate whether you have the skills. But to me, if you can't even hold a conversation, if you're just sitting there nodding your head or say yes, or I've had a candidate I've asked about, what have you done in the past, or what have you done on this project? And they said, well, my team did this, my team did that. I said, well, that's not the question. The question is, what did you do? Because if your team did it, great. I'm not hiring your team. I'm trying to hire you. So those are red flags to me right off the bat that they can't even answer basic questions like that.
Actually, how important do you consider it to have like a GitHub that's active versus like the test background offline?
So I will say that if someone has a GitHub on their, or if they give it to me when they get to the interview or show me it, I'm happy to look at it. It first off says that, oh, they know how to use GitHub, which you'd be surprised how many people don't, which is a good thing. I will go in there and review some code. I actually, especially for front-end developers, will look at source code on the website to see, okay, how did they do this, did that? You know, because especially if you give me a personal website, you better be proud of that personal website and be willing to someone look at kind of the code, especially as, you know, I said front-end developer, they're much easier because you could just see the JavaScript or you can see how it renders. But even a PHP framework, you look how they did the front end. Is it, you know, what did they use on the front end? They used it jQuery, Bootstrap, something modern, or are they still using JavaScript only? Or does it look like it's from the 80s where it's just a big page, or 90s, it's a big page that just scrolls down, or does it do cool stuff? You know, and those are the things that you do notice as it, because you're going, oh, if they did that for their website, then they've learned those skills, they have those skills, they can translate them to the job. So, yes.
Do you give any like supply any kind of pre-read to anyone that you're going to be interviewing?
I do not. So, you mean like, do I screen them beforehand? Is that?
Like an idea of this is how, you know, the interview's going to go, or this is kind of what we expect from the candidates who are applying. And could you just explain how what you're looking for is not necessarily that they finish the test because you created the test pattern?
So I do tell them that they will probably not complete the test. So I do tell them that they have a time limit and just get as far as you can, as best as you can, and I'll be back. You know, I check on them once or twice as they're sitting there just to make sure that everything's okay. But I do explain to them that there's two, you know, the first time they take the test, I say, here's this test. That one I don't give them a time limit for because really most of them are multiple choice. There's a couple of things that they have to fill out. But overall, you know, it should be basic knowledge.
Because you mentioned that what you're also looking for is not necessarily that they have the basic knowledge, but how they're going to apply it. So I wonder if you even make that kind of clear to them, saying that not only are you going to be looking at their answers, but the thought process they've taken to come to that answer.
So I think that develops naturally in the interview. Like, so your question was, do I tell them that there's going to be more tests and that not just a basic test, but an application of that, which is going to be a little more important if we get there. So to me, as we're going through the process, as we're going through the interview, if I feel like the candidate is someone that I'm looking to take to the next step, I will tell them that. The first skills test I give to everyone, unless they absolutely know nothing. Like literally, they have on the resume, they know things, and I'm like, okay, I brought them in because they seem like, okay. You know, if they made it past HR, they probably have some, I hope that they have some skills, and so I start talking to them. And if I ask them every question about, you know, whether, you know, they say, oh, we can do this and that, I start talking to them and they have really, oh, I don't know that, I don't know that, I don't know that. Then I'll just, you know, end it and say, okay, thank you very much for coming in. You know, I don't know. Sometimes I tell them we'll get back to them. I usually tell them, you know, somebody will get back to them. But at that point, they should know that, you know, if the interview was 10 minutes, you're not going to get the job because. But if we start talking and it's been, let's say, 45 minutes, and I'm like, okay, let's get to the skills test, and I tell them, I said, after this, if you do well, and I always leave a caveat, if you do well, there is another test that I will give, and we'll bring you back for that. So I do tell them that there is a potentially second test.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because in my experience, when I've interviewed candidates before, and just the idea of being in a test and that whole mindset that like being tested can kind of put them into, I myself try and the team that I work with, we try and get candidates to be in a scenario of feeling like it doesn't matter at the end how much you complete, but let's like go on this journey of how you've decided to approach a question, how you're answering it, etc., so we can see exactly how your mind is working rather than just coming to only an answer.
Yeah, so I do tell all the candidates that take the test that they will probably not complete it, and I don't expect them to complete it, that my goal is to see how far they get and how well they do on the questions they do get. So I do tell them that ahead of time. I'm not saying you're going to get that from every interviewer, but I do tell them that because I feel like it's fair because, like I said, I used to give them unlimited time, and then it's 6 o'clock, and I'm like, this started at 1 o'clock. Why are you still here?
Yeah, and also you want to manage their expectations too.
Correct.
The candidate experience.
Yeah, so I give them, I feel like, enough time to kind of either succeed or fail, because if they don't know anything, you're not going to get very far. If you know a little bit, or if you know a lot, then you'll get pretty far. So it kind of allows me to gauge that based on that. But yeah, I definitely put a time limit because I've learned people will sit there for as long as you let them. I leave. So the test is, you weren't probably here, but so the first test is a knowledge test. So I will walk by a couple of times, make sure that they're not Googling the answers or using their phone. Because I do tell the candidates that not to use the internet. It's really a basic test. I mean, it's basic enough. Like one of the questions is, what is a CDN? You should know that answer if you're a developer, right? You'd be surprised how many people don't know that answer. But we'll come to a tech interview. But anyway, the second test, the skills test, is more of a test to see how they work. So that one, you can use the internet to your heart's content. If you can read documentation, you can, if you Google it and it takes you to Stack Overflow, feel free. I mean, if you want to copy someone's code and modify it to do what is there, that's what we do at work, right? Everyone does that. And that's what I'm looking for, is how are they actually going to be on the job? So that's why I've done that second test that way.
So how long do you find is ideal for like speaking with the candidate plus like the interview? Like what's the ideal length for that? Do you feel?
So I feel like the candidates I've hired usually go a little longer than, and I'm not saying there hasn't been candidates that I've sat with longer as well, but it ends up being, for me, about 45 minutes to an hour. Sometimes I've sat with candidates for an hour and 15, especially if we get into a interesting conversation or, we get into their project and they're explaining it and we're going on, and I want to learn kind of what they're doing, and they have a cool technology and they're trying to do something cool, and I'm like, did you try this? Did you try that? And we end up talking about something unrelated to the job. Maybe I'm helping them out and saying, have you tried this technology? Like, no, what is that? And I start explaining to them, but you kind of get that gauge of, oh, this is someone that's interesting, someone that would work well on a job, is interested in learning, but it can also teach me something. So those are the things I'm looking for. Like I said, we have a very small team, so it's very difficult for, we have one backend developer and me, so if they don't know something, they come to me, and so I'm mentoring them. But being a manager of 4 people and going to all these other meetings, dealing with other departments, expectations of projects and my boss and issues that come up, you don't have time to kind of do that. So you really I'm looking for someone that's a self-starter. So I'm looking for someone that can figure that out on their own, or come to me and say, I have 3 suggestions, which I think this is the one you're going to go with, or this one we prefer. Is that right? Or what? And then I could say, yeah, that's right. Let's go with it. Or, yeah, let's do that with a little modification. Or actually, let's do the other one because of this business requirement they may not have known of. So that's really what I'm looking for in my employees, and it's and trying to figure that out in an interview process is difficult. And like I said, sometimes you find someone that you can have an hour interview, and you think, oh, it's a great candidate, you know what they're doing, and then you bring them in, and like I said, they're now the know-it-all who comes in and says, well, why are you doing it this way? We should do it that way. I don't agree with you. And I'm like, well, I'm in charge here. I appreciate your concerns and everything else. I've taken some of your other suggestions that I thought were good, but these things, like, we're doing it this way for a reason. I've been here for a long time. I know what I'm doing. And so it becomes a difficult kind of manager position that you have to kind of almost put your foot down and say, no, we're not doing it your way.
Yeah, we actually get that a lot. A lot of interviewees will come in and tell us how we should be doing our stack, and it's like, we don't do that, because we have reasons for it.
Yeah. Yes.
So when you have like you ask a technical question, that person really don't know how to answer that. You rather hear him saying, I don't know, or you rather hear try to come up with that and make it sense?
Well, I don't want someone to just give me a BS answer. If they don't know about a technology, they could say, or if you've heard of it. I mean, really, a lot of the questions I'm asking were on the things that I sent home with you that said, or the job description that said, we're looking for people that are proficient in these technologies. You would be, if you don't know that technology, that might be fine, but you should at least go Google it, figure out what it is. If it's a database technology, and it's a, we have Mongo on our list. If it's a NoSQL technology, go see what it does. How it, go compare it to MySql and say, okay, how does this work? One's relational, one's NoSQL, and then when you have the interview and they say, oh, you can say, I've read about it, I haven't actually used it, but I think it's interesting because of these reasons, then you know something about it. But there's rarely something that comes in that says, oh, we're using this technology. It wasn't on the job description that I need you to know. So if there's a technology on there that is on the job description, it'd behoove you to go at least research it a little and be able to say, oh, I know something about that. Now, if you come in and you're going to be a PHP developer and I say, oh, do you know SAS? And you say, no, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. I'm not going to hold it against you. But if you knew it, I'd say, oh, they know that as well. So those are the kind of things, if it's on their job description, if it's a backend related, and you're coming in for that job, then yes, I want you to know that. Now, if you're a front-end developer and I ask you what SAS is, you better know what it is. If you don't know that, then why are you interviewing for an Angular job? So those are the kind of, so think about that next time. And it goes back to your resume. So when you're doing the job description, if you don't know something, just Google it. So I think the most difficult part for a candidate, and I'll kind of talk about the wait, is after the interview, you get home and you're like, oh, they told me they'd call me. Why aren't they calling you? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First off, there could be a lot more candidates that they're still interviewing, so they don't know. Two is they could have saw you as a candidate they sort of liked and could see them hiring, but they're trying to wait to see if there's a better candidate coming by. The third one is they just forgot about you. They decided not to hire you, but it wasn't communicated well to someone to say, somebody needs to reach out to that person and tell them that, we're not, to thank them and say we're not interested. But the waiting for another candidate is also tricky because you might be trying to go interview somewhere else and you can get a position, something at a different job. So then it makes it difficult if they've waited, especially in this job environment where everyone has a job and it's very hard to find candidates. If they don't give an offer right away, the candidate probably is going to get an offer somewhere else. Or if they do give it right away and they've now got 2 or 3 offers, now they're going to try either see what offer is the best. They might go back and say, actually, I want more money or I want more of this. So it becomes a difficult game in trying to get that person to come aboard. So I've had some people we've made offers to and they said, oh, we already took a job somewhere else. So, and sometimes that's the way it goes. So you guys have any other questions about interviewing, any other process, even anything you guys are curious about from a manager's perspective, things like that?
So if you're not hearing back from a company, how long would you wait before you contact them?
So I just had this personal experience a couple weeks ago where I interviewed, and they said, oh, I said, I hope to hear from you. They said, oh, we'll definitely let you know either way. So a week goes by, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Finally, I decided, I'll email them. I'll email the guy, the person, the recruiter from their company. I emailed them. They said, oh, we just made an offer, and somebody just accepted an offer. I was like, well, when were you going to tell everyone else? But if anything changes, we'll let you know. So sometimes you have to come back. It's a real, if you go too early, and my dad's interviewing right now, and he has the same thing where they say, oh, we'll get back to you, and then it's like, well, that person's on vacation, so we're not going to have a decision for 2 more weeks. So it really comes down to, if you're really interested in the job, I would say wait 2 weeks, contact them again, and say, or if you really want I mean, you don't want to. The other thing is you don't want to be too desperate from the other end. You know, you almost want to play it off like, okay, if you don't hire me, I'm okay. You know, my desktop. Stop. I didn't know how to turn off the buzzer. So, to me, I would just, you know, it really depends on the job. Like, that's why I waited 4 weeks. I have a good job. If I got the new job, I'd be thrilled, but I'm not desperate for the, you know, I'm looking at positions that are interesting to me, things that will take me to the next level in my career. So if they don't hire me, like I said, first thing I said at the beginning is the worst thing they can do is say no, right? I still have a great job. I'm not worried that they didn't take me. Plus, if you think about it, every time you get a no, it's one step closer to getting a yes. So every time you hear no from someone that says, actually, we didn't want to hire you, the next one could, you know, could be your potential yes, but at least there's one less no that you now have to hear before that yes. So don't be afraid to go out there and apply for jobs. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes. So that's something I forgot to mention. I should add that to my notes. Is at the end of the interview, if you didn't get a business card, I highly suggest asking for one. And then when you get home, write the person interviewed a thank you. It's interesting how I always say, oh, I got to thank you. Okay, it doesn't mean much. And then you get that candidate that doesn't send you a thank you, and you're like, oh, that's like it stands out in your mind that someone didn't send you something that said thank you. It's nice to say, oh, especially if there are other people you're interviewing it, if you mention their names and say, I appreciate their time as well, so that it goes and you know, you kind of have that. You remember who they were. You appreciated their time that they took to see you. And just hope to hear from you. You know, those types of things. I'm really interested in the job, and you know, there might be another reason, you know, you could go back to. I think this would be a great fit for both of us. So, you know, but just a thank you would be enough. But if you wanted to embellish a little more, there wouldn't be, I don't think, any harm in that. So, I have only been on one. Well, now that I've been on a second interview, I've only been in one interview in my life because my first job I got. So, but like I said, I've read books. And I've listened to podcasts about people that this is what they do for a living. It's very similar. I mean, I've listened to podcasts where they explain how to shake your hand for 20 minutes. Like not to shake when you come in and shake a hand, but they explain in 20 minutes, like, you should have this grip, and you should do this, and you should do that. You're like, and so they get very technical and very, like, specific things in the process. So, like, you walk in, and you want to make sure to, you know, kind of put your arm out in such a way and grab them in this place. And I'm like, seems like excessive kind of things to do. But one of the things they do talk about is as you go through your job, you update your resume often, so that, or put a lot of things that you do, right? You just had a new project. Here's the things that you completed. Put it on your resume. That way, when you have to go look for a new job, you don't have to go remembering what you did, right? It's there. You know, if you're having reviews at the end of the year and they talk about metrics that you've met, maybe that's something that you put on your resume. And it might not be everything that ends up in the resume that you give to a company, but at least when you have a company, you're like, oh, here's the job description. This meets the job description. Let me put that in my resume. So
kind of like keep like a bulleted list and just be like, cut out these lines.
Correct. And then especially if you format in the way that has action items, like I did this and it caused this, by the time you get to putting your resume together, you don't have to think about it. It's already there. You kind of, and that way if you do it as you go on as well, you don't think about, okay, what was that project we worked on? What was my role? What did I do? So if you kind of do that a couple of times a year, especially maybe once a quarter, it keeps your resume up to date, whether you put it on LinkedIn or not. Is, you know, the other thing I've heard is remember that you're selling yourself. So if you go on LinkedIn, your resume and your LinkedIn should kind of match. So, and a lot of things should almost be verbatim, like on your resume, it's on LinkedIn. So if someone goes, they're like, oh, it's the same thing. Like someone's thought about the whole person and the whole kind of marketing aspect of yourself. You know, you're selling yourself. And the same thing, I don't know if you guys know about Indeed Prime. So if you're looking for a job, go to Indeed Prime. You can put out a profile, and there's recruiters on there as well. And they will actually help you with your resume. They'll help you with some of these things. They have people that will coach you, and it's free. So I highly recommend it. They're out of Connecticut. That's how I know it. So, but they will, obviously they also have job postings like LinkedIn, but they, Indeed Prime is one of those like lesser known things that especially I think it hasn't gotten, the jobs part people know about, obviously, but the fact that you can put a profile on and have recruiters kind of search for you isn't known. No, I agree that don't be afraid to ask, if they ask, do you have any more questions? I think that's a good question is, you're working here, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And people, like I said, I'll be honest with them and I'll tell them. So, but that's a good way to gauge a company. Because remember, the interview is also not just about the company figuring out if the candidate is a good fit, it's the candidate trying to figure out if the company is a good fit as well. So that is the end of my talk. So thank you all. I know we have the closing keynote coming up after this. So thank you.